Hi there. This video is looking at some solving the development issues that we looked at last lesson or last video. And what I'm going to do today is this is going to be quite a long video with lots of information because we're going to explain the reasons that restrict development, and we're going to look at internal, external factors for countries who are developing, and I'm going to try and explain what they are. So by the end of the lesson, you're going to be able to explain what an internal and external factor is, and then explain how external internal factors can restrict development. So remember, development is all about trying to progress a country, progress certain areas as well. So we're going to look at ways, basically the factors which stop that from happening. So we're really looking at the last two dot points. I mean, we're going to be start hitting these equity issues related to ethnicity, class, and gender, and I'm going to start looking at some ecological sustainable development, and just show you some of the massive issues. So first of all, just recap what makes a developing country. These are some of the things we've got: poor health and low access to health services, low life expectancy, high infant mortality rates, low capita per income, poverty and indebtedness, high levels of illiteracy, high rates of population growth, low levels of technology, emphasis on primary production, dietary deficiencies, low levels of infrastructure, and low levels of energy consumption. So that's what's the characteristics of a developing country. Now, remember the factors that restrict development. We know that obviously there's certain characteristics, and we know that some countries are, due to history, are, restricted to the rate of development. So when we're looking at development, we also need to be considerate of the scale of development, and then look at these internal, external factors, and just realise that development is very, very complex, and these factors will affect the rate of development. So we're going to start off with internal factors first. So when I talk about an internal factor is a country, or what we're talking about when we talk about development of a country, we're talking about the factors within that country. That's what an internal is. So the thing that restricts a country's development is its resource base. There are differing levels of wealth, and that's a lot of it to do with natural resources. Some countries like Qatar, UAE, the United Arab Emirates, have really done well because of their resources. If countries have enough resources, they can become developed, and we've seen that particularly in the Middle East. A lot of countries are politically unstable, so a lot to do with that. If we look at that picture there of Africa, a lot of those countries don't really represent the people who live there, and as you can see, you've got the bottom picture of colonial Africa. So basically those countries really represent the colonies that were brought over by Europe. So that has led to a lot of instability of politics, which has caused a lot of restricted development, because a lot of these countries will have civil war. So that's some of the internal factors. A few more is population growth. Countries like the UK, USA have had time to sort of get used to their population. Well, recently we've seen massive increases, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, of population, and then that restricts development because there's too many people, not enough resources. And then we've got environmental degradation. So to try and sort of get these resources, we have to sort of clear trees, as you can see in this picture. And then what happens? They restrict the amount of resources because of the environmental impact. So a country might be rich in natural resources, but can't actually access them because of the remoteness of those places, which means it can't develop. So that's an internal factor that restricts its development. And then it basically compounds the problems of underdevelopment because we can't get those resources, and there's not much you can do as well. So an external factor would be the legacy of history, particularly after World War II, where we saw a lot of the colonies like the UK just leave those colonies, and rightly so, because they took over those places by force, but because they did it at such speed, it led to political instability, and also a lot of the colonies took the natural resources or sold them off to private companies, so those countries don't already have access to those resources. So that restricts the amount of development. Another one is debt burden. So during particularly the 1970s, there was a dramatic increase the price of oil, and there was a big issue with oil, the OPEC crisis, and as a result, a lot of countries went into debt, and as a result, huge loans were created at low interest rates. However, during the 1980s, those interest rates really started to increase rapidly, and as a result, countries couldn't keep up with the debt. So as a result, there's countries who are in debt to other rich countries. Also, when we have recessions and we're about to hit a recession, the developing countries become protectionist, which means they protect their own economy and call in those debts, which means those other countries who are struggling can't pay, and as a result, you get further into more debt. Some countries have started doing it, debt for nature swaps. So in the 80s, what they tried to do was, sell off their natural resources to these developed countries at reduced price, and as a result, you have a lot of environmental degradation. I'll put that link to the YouTube video there to explain in more detail. But debt, burden is a massive thing, and it's not just an economic issue; it's an environmental issue as well. And then obviously some more debt. In 1960, the world's poorest countries, roughly 60 countries classified as low income by the world, but own 25 billion in debt. By 2002, this was 523 billion. So, for example, for Africa in 1960, it was just under 11 billion. By 2002, it's over 295 billion. Debt's owned to multilateral institutions such as the IMF, which is the International Monetary Fund, and that is currently about 3 billion. So for the poorest countries, debts to military institutes around 70 billion. So these are huge loans, and these poor countries are still trying to pay that off. And that's why it's an external, because you've got these big institutions like the IMF and World Bank still wanting their money. There has been a recent sort of campaign to get these institutions to cut the debt. They have started doing that, but still these countries are in debt. I'll share that link with you. The hypothetical US debt in 2016, 16.8 trillion, and they still want these poor countries to pay back. So it's that, sort of taking a mixed sort of type of attitude. So I'll put that there for you to watch as well. And then you've got trading balances, and we'll look at these trading balances as well. So the reason why these developing countries can't develop quickly is because trade doesn't suit them. So yeah, they've got natural resources, but when they do sell those natural resources, it's normally at a lower price, because the developed countries take those primary industries and then take them and modify them, manufacture them, they can sell more. So as a result, what happens is that trade and trade rules, poor countries don't receive the amount of wealth and don't become developed. So it's another external factor. Then we've got transnational corporations, and what I want you to do is see if you can think to name some, and in your notes write some down. TNCs prosper on profit. TNCs obviously have headquarters in rich countries and all the manufacturing in the other countries. It seems like a good idea to have these TNCs in a poorer country. However, because they want profit, if wages aren't low or if the TNCs can't make profit, then they just pull out the country, and that's a big issue, because then the sort of developing country can't attract new businesses. There's lots of unemployment, so it's really important that TNCs treat these developing countries with a bit of respect, because developing countries can't rely on TNCs. And then obviously we've got militarisation. So after World War II, many of the newly independent countries of the developing world became involved in international power politics. Without support from the developed world, developing countries face concern over security, and that's why developed countries like USA and Russia believe that giving military aid to developing countries gave them a strong position in the world. And these countries, these poorer countries, took on the military and took on the debt, and as a result, even more in debt as well. So, although we had the Cold War going on, poor countries are still involved, and people like America, Russia profited on that, and got these developing countries into much more debt as well. And then dependency. Many poor countries are heavily dependent on development assistance or overseas aid, and we'll look at aid as well. So aid obviously is given countries money. There's three different types: bilateral, multilateral, and non-government aid, and I'll go into those in a little bit in a bit more detail as well. But yeah, there's big issues with these developing countries. So that's all the end of the video. There's a lot of information to go there. This is going to take you a long time to go through your notes. Basically, internals to do with the country, external outside the country as well. So we'll have a look at those in more sort of in more detail. And it's really hard for these developing countries because the rules about trade, debt are so against them. So hopefully that's explained to you what how developing countries are affected by sort of internal external factors. All right, thanks. Bye.